Mainly due to COVID restrictions, each candidate is being interviewed individually. And today's candidate is Johanna Baxter from the Scottish Labour Party. Welcome, Johanna. Would you like to make a short opening statement to the voters of Renfrewshire North and West prior to going into the specific questions?
Thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity. I guess for me, I think the voters of Renfrewshire North and West deserve an MSP who will show up in Parliament, stand up and fight for them relentlessly. I've been concerned the last year that our constituency has not had a voice in Parliament. The sitting MSP has not been seen in Parliament, either in person or virtually, for over a year. And in any year, that would be, I think, disrespectful to voters. But in the year that we've had, where our fellow citizens have lost their loved ones, many have lost their jobs, we've been in the middle of a global pandemic, an economic crisis, I think that's unforgivable, really. And, you know, I have fought all my life for the values of the Labour Party. I wasn't born into a politically active family, not immediate family anyway, but my granddad was a Polish migrant. He worked down the pits, and I think he instilled a lot of the values that I hold dear and have carried with me throughout my life in the trade union movement. And over the last year, I have been at the forefront of fights for protections for our frontline workers in local government. I'm the lead negotiator for local government workers in Scotland. So have been leading those negotiations to try to make sure that they have been protected whilst they have continued to go out and work during the pandemic, putting their own lives before others to keep our communities running. So that's the sort of person I am. That's the sort of MSP that I would want to be. I'll be here. I will show up and I would work very hard for the residents of Renfrewshire North and West.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the specific questions now. Obviously, as you indicated there, the pandemic and the recovery is the number one subject immediately that's going to be in the focus for all the voters. So how would Labour's plans or your plans be in place to ensure the nation's security against future viruses, as well as working a roadmap out of this current situation? And following that, you know, it's had a major effect on the economy. I see from your published papers that you've got a whole wheen of activity, which you'll explain. But I was just wanting to know about timescales with regard to that.
Well, I mean, I think the recovery from the pandemic has got to be the focus of the next Parliament. We are in an economic crisis, the likes of which none of us have ever seen before. Not only in the last year have many people been furloughed, and we have relied on UK funds in order to support those on furlough to keep their jobs so that there is something for people to go back to when we come out of the immediacy of the lockdown restrictions. But the number of people who have lost their roles, unfortunately, has dramatically increased. And forecasts anticipate that by the middle of this year, we will be facing an unemployment crisis of 7.6% unemployment rate is what the forecasts are saying. That's over 200,000 people in Scotland. And so I think in terms of recovery, the focus has to be on jobs, about creating new jobs. And when we think about creating new jobs, we have to think about what the world of work is going to look like post-pandemic, and what actually the rest of the world and the challenges of our world look like. And for me, that's got to be about ensuring those jobs are green jobs, because we have a climate crisis as well. We're facing, difficulties on many fronts, but good, sustainable green jobs are fundamentally important. Everyone who wants to work should have a right to work. So that's why the jobs recovery plan that Anna Sarwar has outlined is really important. The skills training plan and investment that Anna has outlined in the manifesto, it is really important to create those jobs. But more than that, I think we are facing a health crisis. And I don't just mean the one in relation to the COVID virus. I mean the fact that there have been delayed treatments for people who have been suffering from cancer, for example, throughout the period of the pandemic, because of the focus of the NHS on treating sufferers of the virus. But I also think there is a massive issue with mental health, and the number of workers who have had to transition from being in the office every day, all day, and who have found themselves working from home in an environment that is very likely unsuited to that. Many of them working from their sofa or the kitchen worktop. And there are a host of other problems that come from that. Loneliness, isolation, and also just the normal day-to-day relations that happen in a working environment, collaboration, and also the possibility that new technologies that are coming to the fore are now allowing employers to track workers' activity in a way that they've never been able to do before. So I think there's a number of facets to that national recovery. I think they're all very important in their own right. They will take a lot of investment. I think our communities have to be at the forefront of that, and that will require supporting our public services and being at the heart of that as well. So it's not going to be an easy time. We're not going to come out of this in 6 months or a year. I wish we would. It will take the focus of the next Parliament.
Okay, well, it's given us some timescales anyway. A lot of food for thought there. You were hinting at some of the aspects of the NHS. Obviously, it's under a great deal of pressure, but it needs to progress, and it has to look at other aspects out with the COVID, although I still think we need to make sure we're bulletproof, if you like, against future viruses. What are the priorities, do you think, in terms of the NHS out with COVID?
I think one of the most urgent is the mental health crisis that we're facing. And again, this is not just individuals who are working from home, it's also people who had mental health issues pre-COVID, who have seen their treatment either diminish or evaporate as a result of the pandemic, because the focus of the NHS has understandably had to be about getting people through this virus. And obviously we've now passed a huge number of deaths as a result of the virus. But mental health, I think, has to be a significant focus. Less than 8% of the NHS budget is spent on mental health support. That needs to increase. And I think the other thing that we have to think about is how we deal with our care sector. I think, what this virus has absolutely shown is that our care sector was not fit for purpose in terms of coping with the virus. We know that workers in social care are earning pitiful wages. It's not the only issue, but it is a major issue. It's a sector that's not that regulated. We now have integrated joint boards between the NHS and local government, but they don't always work so well. And there's a lack of accountability there in terms of management of the procurement processes that take place with private sector care providers. There's a lack of control in terms of workers being able to manage their workload. So we very often see workers in that sector being given, 15 minutes to provide care for an elderly resident at the beginning or the end of the day. it's not sufficient. We need to really revamp our care sector. So the recommendations in the recent Feely report are very important. They talk about fair work in the sector, also better management of procurement and oversight. So I think a lot of the recommendations in that are worthy of consideration. I wouldn't necessarily say it will provide all of the answers, but it will certainly go some way to solving some of the problems. And I would say that it is a sector that has long been neglected, actually, in terms of the nation's health and well-being through lack of investment. And, right at the start of this pandemic, in my role as head of local government in Unison, were having to fight to get the personal protective equipment that those workers needed. And they were frightened of contracting or passing on the virus between their vulnerable clients. We should never have to be in a position where we're having to fight to get people that are providing the care our elderly so desperately require, the personal protection that protects both the worker and the client.
Yes. To an extent, that answers the future viruses aspect as well, to a degree.
I think actually some of the future viruses lead in also to the conversation about the climate and our relationship with nature and the pressure on our natural resources. And I think things like that can only be dealt with through national and international collaboration. And it is... history tells us that these sorts of viruses are much more likely to arise where there is pressure on natural resources. So I do think if we're going to protect ourselves against future viruses, we need to invest in the science. We need to take heed of the science. I'm very much a believer in the scientists rather than what you might find on the internet. But but we need to make sure that the research is there, that the international collaboration is there, that we don't ever find ourselves in a position where nations are fighting each other for vaccines to fight things like this.
Go on to education now, another avid topic. What actions need to be taken to make up the lost ground for the current problems with the children at school and their education that's happened because of the lockdowns, and what needs to be done to protect the future education within Scotland to make it previous position as a leading educator sort of come back, if you like? Yes.
So, I mean, I think it has been a really difficult year for children. They've been stuck at home. Their parents have been having to try to educate them as well as doing their own jobs. They've been away from their friends as well. And I think that the social aspect of school is very important for them. So, I mean, firstly, I think we need to recognise the amount of pressure that those children have faced in the past year. I think there was previously a commitment that there wouldn't be national tests or exams in the way that they otherwise have been. I think some of the guidance that has been put out by the SQE might look very much like an exam and feel like an exam for the children that are having to sit those tests. So I think we need to be cognizant that there has been a lot of pressure. I don't think we should add additional pressure on those children. I do think that we need to invest in our teachers, but also the rest of the school staff. Because one thing that the pandemic has shown is that, quite frankly, if the cleaners and the janitors and the classroom assistants hadn't turned up to work, then our schools would not have been open. And they wouldn't have been clean and they wouldn't have been safe. So, we need to invest in all of the school staff and establishments as a whole and treat them with equal importance. I then think also you need to invest in Early years, there's been a rollout of 1140 hours childcare across Scotland. That's gone well in some areas, but not so well in others. And that really leads us into how children develop and, the early stages of their career. So I think it is from those early stages up to individuals who are transitioning into university. And I do think, it is a real shame that working class children are still less likely to be able to go to university now in Scotland than those from well-off backgrounds. And I don't think that the circumstances you're born into should determine whether or not you are able to get a good education fundamentally.
Okay. Your National Recovery Plan talks about investment in a national training fund, funding for cancer treatment, mental health, carers pay, IT support for schools, investment in green jobs, and community recovery funds. How do you intend to pay for these additional commitments over and above the debt that's already there from the pandemic costs?
So I think one thing is there are unallocated Barnett consequentials that have not yet been spent. So there is money in the system. And I think some of this will generate money to pay for itself. So, investing in the training of young people is going to ensure that they're more likely to be in a job that generates an income than not. But I think some of it is also about the choices, the political choices about how we spend the money that's in the system. So one of the things you touched on there was about our communities being at the forefront. And one thing that is really very important to me is investment in our local councils. I know it's not a sexy subject, but it's an area that has been long neglected by the current government, and that's been a political choice. So since 2013-14, the Scottish Government's budget has, from Westminster, has increased 3.2%, and local government budgets have decreased 2.4% in that same period. So there has been a deliberate decision to not invest that money in local councils. And the reason I focus on those is not because of the rubbish collections and the potholes, the things that everybody sees and is most visible in terms of how our council tax is spent, but it's all of those hidden roles that have been fundamental over the past year in terms of keeping our communities running. So I say things like, the home support workers, the classroom assistants, the environmental health officers who built temporary mortuaries to prevent our NHS hospitals from being overwhelmed. There's just so many critical roles in local government that are fundamental to keeping those local services going that need investment. They're not getting it. So in terms of the National Recovery Plan, it's about spending money that has not yet been allocated. It's about generating money through some of the things we're investing in. And it's about making different political choices.
Right. Okay. That's excellent. Thank you. Final question. Many constituents are concerned about the fractious nature of recent politics. Okay. And this has expanded beyond the normal party politics and gone into society itself and left, we think, divisions in society. How do you plan to calm these tensions and return our politics to a less divisive state?
Well, I think it's a really important question. It's one that I've been very concerned about. I think, first of all, you need to lead by example. Right. So, you don't engage in gutter politics. I would never personalise disagreements with my political opponents. I would have disagreements with them. We wouldn't be in politics if we didn't have different views about how we make our country a fairer place. But you can disagree without being disagreeable.
Right.
I think so. You lead by example by not engaging in that sort of manner. And then I think, we have to take a stance in terms of some of the social media companies and making sure that, anonymous trolls don't get airtime to just abuse people. I mean, I just think it is deeply unacceptable, and people have a right to free speech, but not a right to attack other people at will. That's not right. We should not live in a society where people feel that they're not able to speak up. And then I think also in terms of leading by example, it's about maintaining trust with our electorate. So when you say that you're going to do something, you do it. And when you don't know the answer to something, you say you don't know the answer. A bit of honesty.
Well,
and I think also hard work. I don't think, and I certainly wouldn't vote for somebody that I thought was in it for myself, because that's, why would you vote for somebody who was self-motivated? You would vote for somebody who had your interests at heart, and that is everything that I've tried to do throughout my, life work in the trade union movement. I think it's really important. And to be honest, in my day job, I've always felt like I was able to make a difference. The last pay negotiations we concluded in local government was the best pay deal in a decade. But for me, it's about the fact that put money in the pockets of some of the lowest paid.
Yes.
We're, in a dispute on that issue at the moment in the current pay negotiations. But for me, the thing that always grounds me is, the members that I represent, if the worker who is on, $9.50 an hour is not going to get something from a rise, then my motivation is to make sure that they do, because otherwise, why are we in it?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Just as a slight follow-up to that one, Anas Sawar has been quoted as saying, not only need to have a better government, but also a better opposition. Now, I'm not asking you to cast which way you're going to be, but will you get heard over the babble of the SNP v the Conservatives over independence and the union? Will you be able to be heard?
I think we will. I hope that we will. And I think actually people are much more willing to hear you if you're speaking honestly and from the heart. And so that's what I will try to do. Clearly, there is always going to be debate about the Constitution. I don't think that's the solution to all of our ills. I think we should use powers that we already have. I remember in 1999 campaigning for the establishment of the Scottish Parliament, and it could be an institution that delivered so much more. And I'd like it to do that. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Johanna. Would you like to make a closing statement now?
I think we've probably covered most of it. But yeah, I would be grateful for the consideration of voters in Renfrewshire North and West. I would be a diligent MSP.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking part in our hustings.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.